So picture this, a company with literally zero revenue, but somehow it's got a multi-billion-dollar valuation. They've just signed a deal with a tech giant to help power the entire AI revolution. And their big idea? It's all riding on a radical new take on nuclear energy. Today, we're digging into the absolutely wild, high-stakes story of Oklo. Is this the company that's going to solve AI's massive energy crisis? Or is it just a dream built on a whole lot of speculation? Let's get into it.
Okay, so to really get what Oklo is all about, you first have to understand the huge problem they're trying to fix. This whole AI boom isn't just about clever code and algorithms, it's about raw power. We're talking about massive, energy-guzzling data centers that are the real engines behind AI. And their appetite for electricity is just skyrocketing, creating this global power crunch that our old-school energy grids are really struggling to handle.
And this is where our story really kicks into high gear. You've got tech giants like Meta searching for some pretty out-there solutions, and boy have they found one. Get this, a dedicated 1.2 gigawatt nuclear campus. And the startup they've teamed up with to pull this off is Oklo, a relative newcomer in the very old game of nuclear power. This one deal, just this one, has thrown Oklo right into the center of this huge conversation about how we're going to power our digital future.
So, first up, let's just set the stage a little bit more. We need to look closer at the context for this massive bet, and that is AI's absolutely insatiable demand for power.
The core technology here, the thing that makes this all possible, is the Small Modular Reactor, or SMR for short. Now, these are not your grandpa's sprawling, custom-built nuclear plants. Think of SMRs as being kind of like nuclear Legos. They're designed to be much smaller, built in a factory, and then shipped and installed more easily right where you need them. The whole idea is to make nuclear power way more flexible and scalable for specific jobs, like, you guessed it, powering a giant data center campus.
All right, so that's the theory behind the tech, but how is Oklo actually using it? What exactly are they building that's got Silicon Valley so excited?
While Oklo's main product, which they call the Aurora Powerhouse, has gone through a huge evolution. They started out proposing this tiny 1.4 megawatt microreactor. But their current design? Whoa, it's a much beefier 75 megawatt sodium-cooled fast reactor. And here's the kicker. It's based on a design that has actually been built and successfully operated before. And basing their design on that old reactor, the Experimental Breeder Reactor 2, or EBR2, that is such a critical move. It means Oklo gets to inherit decades of real-world data and proven features. Probably the most important benefit is its safety. The physics of this thing are what they call inherently safe. So if the temperature spikes, it just naturally powers itself down. No human has to flip a switch, no complex backup systems have to kick in, it just handles it. Plus, it's designed to run on recycled nuclear fuel. Now that fuel is something called HALEU. It stands for high-assay, low-enriched uranium. Basically, it's a more potent type of nuclear fuel that's pretty much essential for a lot of these next-gen reactor designs. But here's the catch. Making it is super complex, and the supply chain for it is really just getting started. That's a key piece of the puzzle we're going to come back to in a bit.
Okay, so Oklo's got the technology, but in the nuclear world, that's only half the battle, maybe even less. The other, much bigger part is getting through the notoriously slow and complicated regulatory process. And this is where Oklo made a really clever, pivotal shift in their strategy.
This timeline right here, it tells a real story of challenge and, well, adaptation. Back in 2020, Oklo sent its application to the main regulator, the NRC. But then in early 2022, bam, the application was denied. Not enough information. That was a huge setback. But they didn't give up, they pivoted. In early 2025, they switched to a totally different path, an authorization process through the Department of Energy, the DOE. And because of that strategic shift, they were able to break ground on their very first plant at Idaho National Lab later that same year.
And listen to this. Oklo's CEO, Jake DeWitt, called this DOE pathway one of the most important policy changes in decades. So why is it such a big deal? Well, because it lets them build their first reactor under the DOE's supervision, which is all about research and demonstrating new tech. This lets them gather real-world data to prove their design actually works. It's a completely different and much faster process than the NRC's, which is focused on regulating already proven commercial reactors. It just massively cuts down the risk and the time it takes to get building.
An innovative reactor design, a clever regulatory strategy. It all sounds fantastic, right? But now we have to talk about the money. Because behind this amazing vision, there is a very stark financial reality.
So, when you listen to the company's earnings calls, They paint a really optimistic picture. Management loves to highlight new government policies that could make plutonium available as a kind of bridge fuel. They're calling this a game changer, something that could solve that whole HALEU fuel supply problem for their first 10 or 20 plants. It completely changes the paradigm, as they say, by removing a major roadblock to their growth.
But then you look at their actual income statement, and what you see is, well, nothing. A big fat zero for revenue for the last 4 years, and at the same time, their operating expenses and their net losses have just been ballooning, hitting over $73 million in losses in 2024. This is what it looks like financially when a company is all in on R&D and construction with absolutely no product to sell yet.
So you're probably asking, how in the world can they afford to just burn through that much cash? Well, the answer is sitting right on their balance sheet. As of late 2025, Oklo had a massive $1.2 billion in cash and securities. This is their war chest. It's the capital that's letting them fund these incredibly ambitious plans and just soak up those losses while they build their first powerhouse.
But that huge pile of cash doesn't make all the worries just disappear for financial analysts. They point to some pretty clear weaknesses. The company is consistently losing money, and they use this phrase, unfavorable valuation multiples. In plain English, that just means the company's stock price seems ridiculously high for a business that isn't making a dime yet. It makes analysts really start to wonder if it's just completely overvalued.
So let's try to bring these two completely conflicting stories together. Because on one hand, you've got this visionary technology that's aimed at a gigantic market. And on the other, you've got a super high-risk financial situation.
I mean, this chart says it all, doesn't it? It just captures that disconnect perfectly. You've got a market cap in the billions, that's what investors think the company's worth, sitting right next to $0 in actual revenue. This is the absolute definition of a speculative bet. Investors aren't betting on what Oklo is today, they're betting on what it could become, because the potential prize powering the multi-trillion-dollar AI industry is just that huge. So it all boils down to this, really. The promise is incredible. A proven, inherently safe reactor design, a reported 14-gigawatt pipeline of potential customers, and, of course, that landmark deal with Meta. But the peril, the risk, is just as big. No revenue, growing losses, and this immense pressure to actually be the first to build this thing at scale and prove that it can make money.
And that leaves us with the billion-dollar question. Oklo is sitting at the perfect intersection of two of the biggest stories of our time, the rise of AI and the global search for clean energy. But is its technology actually going to deliver on that incredible promise to power the revolution? Or is its sky-high valuation really just a dream built on hype and speculation? You know, the answer to that isn't going to be found in stock charts. It's going to unfold on a construction site out in Idaho.